For more than a century, the Southeast Light has stood watch high atop the Mohican Bluffs on the south shore of Block Island, 12 miles off Rhode Island's coast. Through night, fog, and storm, the light has reached out to mariners, reminding them of where they are, warning them away from the deadly rocks, and calling them home. For the past 20 years, however, this Victorian century has herself faced a threat, not simply from the advent of technology, but from another force far greater than the course of man. Nature has been eroding the bluffs upon which the lighthouse stands, and she has been in danger of falling into the ocean. Now, the lighthouse which has saved so many from the sea has in turn been saved. This 2,000-ton structure has been lifted up and pulled back from the treacherous cliffs. It is a tremendous feat of technology. It is also a story of determination and commitment. For the islanders here share a history with the lighthouse. Some of those who have worked to save her are descendants of those who built her and kept watch in her tower. Others have looked for her beam and listened for her foghorn from out at sea. They have refused to let go of the Southeast Light and her stories of another time and way of life.
When I was little, we used to go up there at night in the summer and watch the beam. And I remember my father pointing out there were 8 beams and there's this big wheel in the sky. We've lost so many things on Block Island over the years. It just, it can't even begin to make a list. And this is a very, very tangible piece of history. It's a part of the old maritime tradition. It's just a piece of a life that is gone, that we think we have the capability of saving.
As shipping along the New England coast increased in the 18th and 19th centuries, thousands of vessels passed by Block Island on the way to and from the Long Island Sound each year. The island's treacherous currents, shoals, and unsheltered shores made shipwrecks and strandings a common occurrence. In the late 1800s, Nicholas Ball lobbied the United States Congress to build a lighthouse on the island's south shore and to create a hospitable gateway to the island, inviting trade and tourism from the outside world.
My great-great-grandfather, Nicholas, was an entrepreneur who saw things that no one else was seeing then. He went to California in the gold rush, made a little money, came back here, bought land around the harbor, and he got the government to build the government breakwater, which really created the harbor at what we now call the village. And he was very instrumental in getting the Southeast Light, as well as life-saving stations around the island.
The United States Lighthouse Service built the North Light in 1869 on the island's northern tip, and the Southeast Light at the opposite end of the island 4 years later. Yet if the building of these lighthouses offered deliverance, the location of the Southeast Light proved to be folly.
In 1880, Lippincott's magazine reported the fact that the local island farmers who farmed here along the southern coast of Block Island warned the federal agents who were building the lighthouse and cautioned them against putting the lighthouse exactly where they did, because these farmers knew very well that they had to move their fences back several feet every year or so to compensate for the steady erosion.
Despite these warnings, construction of the Southeast Light began atop the Mohican Bluffs in 1873, and the flame was first lit on February 1st, 1875.
The lighthouse is unique amongst lighthouses. This building is what is called Gothic Revival style. It's part of the Victorian style of architecture. Its architecture beautifully echoes the wonderful site upon which it stands. You have this very vertical Gothic Revival design atop this very steep Bluff, and the two combined to really sort of soar to the sky, if you will. It places the light as one of the highest, it is the actually highest light in New England, and one of the highest in the nation.
The Southeast Light took, at times, 3 families to run. There was a head keeper, an assistant keeper, and a third keeper, and the way they designed the lighthouse architecturally is interesting. The fact that it was a duplex, so that it's identical on each side, and that each family had their own separate apartments, and yet the tower joined them together so the keepers could enter from the 2nd floor. One of the fascinating things about it, I think, have been the wonderful climb up the tower, the stair. It's a circular staircase with cast iron, sort of open graded stairs. It has had 2 lenses. They both have been a first order, which is the largest size of these Fresnel lenses, which were manufactured in France. So the first one was a beehive design, which went from the floor to the ceiling. And the current one there is just the center section of what the original lens looked like, but it's a bullseye design.
The lens, officially a 21-mile light, could be seen up to 35 miles away on a clear night, and was thought to be so intense that it could start a fire on the mainland, 12 miles away.
I had grown up hearing the stories that the lens was so pure that it had to be covered by these pure linen cloths, and they were very soft. To feel them, they almost felt like silk because they'd been washed so many times, but they covered the lens every day.
Jean Napier's great-grandfather Henry Clark became the light's first keeper in 1875. He was followed by her great-uncle Simon Dodge, and later by her grandfather Willett Clark, who served as keeper until 1931. Jean's mother spent her childhood in the lighthouse.
I grew up hearing all kinds of stories of Grandpa's light. I guess it was quite a life to live there. Like when your father went to work at night, he went up in the tower, and they stood 12-hour shifts because everything was visual. They had to stand and constantly scan the horizon. And at that time, there were hundreds of vessels that went by here every day. And if there was a storm, more than one stood watch up there because they had to all look in various directions. The wives of all lighthouse keepers at that period were very much involved. There was a great pride of service then, and they kept everything. And they had inspectors drop in on them all the time, but the brass had to be polished. There was even a brass dustpan. The wives cooked meals, and many times they would have crews come from the mainland to work on various things, like to work on the foghorn. My mother's told me a couple of times that when she went to bed at night, there was just the family there. And when they got up in the morning, there were some strangers because there had been a shipwreck.
One of the wives of the lighthouse keeper, Mrs. Carr, related to me the story during the '38 hurricane of the rocks from the ocean, which is 200 feet below, flying up and breaking the windows and blowing away the outhouses and the sheds. And yet the keepers stayed there with dishpans on their heads to protect them, keeping the lens going around. And she said she was so nervous. She was making soup for all of them, and that it had been the saltiest soup that they'd ever had because she was so nervous she just kept putting the salt in.
This lighthouse has, in fact, saved lives. It stands as a symbol of the strength of character of the Block Island people and of Block Island itself.
Captain John R. Lewis was the country's youngest shipmaster at the age of 25. The Southeast Light was the first light mariners would see on their way home into Long Island Sound from their Atlantic voyages. He recalls passing the lighthouse as the captain of a passenger ship in the early 1950s.
I would call home and tell them, what time we would be passing the lighthouse. So our children were very small then, just 3 or 4 years old. So they would go up to the lighthouse, and in the nighttime, as we passed, I would start flashing the signal light over toward the lighthouse, and then and they would answer back with the headlights of the car. First off, it came the LORAN, and of course nowadays it's satellite technology, and of course this kind of technology now has gone beyond my experience. I still would want the lighthouse myself.
In 1873, the lighthouse stood more than 300 feet from the cliff's edge. By the 1950s, the Coast Guard began to document the erosion of the cliffs, and by 1983, the pending doom of the lighthouse could no longer be ignored. There remained only 80 feet in front of the lighthouse, and the land was eroding at the rate of 7 feet per year. The islanders knew that if they did not move quickly, the lighthouse would be lost.
The cliff is there, and then the cliff isn't there the next day. Go up there, there are lines where the fences have been. In the wintertime, you can see ice on the beach where the streams come down that help erode the cliff.
A group of people got together and thought, well, there must be some other option besides coating the bluffs with cement and trying to stop the erosion, which we all know from living out here on an island is Mother Nature doesn't cooperate.
Soon, another idea took root. If they could not stop the erosion, could they move this 4 million pound structure off the crumbling cliff?
Perhaps it was Jerry Abbott who floated the idea at first, and it came up in a rather hazy, nebulous way. It was just a thought, not even yet an idea.
I raised the idea at a meeting of the Historical Society Board of Directors in 1983, and it seemed to me that if we didn't do something to try to save the lighthouse, if we saw it fall into the sea, we'd feel very remiss and irresponsible. And the Historical Society began the efforts to rescue this lighthouse in 1983, and in 1986, the Society formed a separate foundation, the Southeast Lighthouse Foundation, to finish the project. And the idea proceeded from there through a whole series of interactions with various agencies, state, federal, and private. And here we are today, 10 years later, after 3 acts of Congress and a lot of generous donations and hard work.
There were some skeptics, some who thought the lighthouse should simply be allowed to fall away into the sea. But that did not stop those who simply could not imagine Block Island without the Southeast Light.
The light was always there because I never slept in a bedroom that the light didn't flash into. Can you imagine Block Island without lighthouses? There are many people that did not agree with putting all this effort and all this money. They would say, let it go. And the same with the North Light. Why save it? It's part of our heritage. It's in the fiber of Block Island and its people. Very important. Future, you know, you don't know where you're going until you know where you've been.
In March of 1993, with less than 60 feet of land remaining between the lighthouse and the sea, preparations for the move began. The goal? To lift up the building in one piece, place it on a network of steel beams, and roll it back 250 feet to safety. Meanwhile, the cliffs continued to erode, and just one hurricane or nor'easter could make the cliffs unsafe for the heavy equipment needed for the lighthouse's rescue. International Chimney Corporation of New York served as the general contractor. They, in turn, contracted expert house movers of Maryland and move consultant Pete Friesen, who had supervised the relocation of some of the largest buildings ever moved.
This move with the 2 buildings separate, a concentrated load for the tower, a spread out load for the house, presents special problems, especially where we only have a walkway connecting the 2. So we're really trying real hard to make this thing hold together. And it's, well, to me, it's a real art to do this, because brick in itself has but very little strength.
Pete really has a feel for what's going to happen here. We have an engineering staff that's able to back up Pete's feel. As Pete put it the other day, yes, it's art, but every bit of art that we're using here is backed up by scientific principles. Our engineers are working frantically to back up Pete's art with the proper scientific principles.
The foundation, we basically were here to accommodate everyone, to sort of make sure that they had what they needed. It was like being in the middle of a circus. I was in one ring and there were several other rings going on at the same time. It was crazy at times, but everyone had a very good sense of humor and cooperated with each other, so it went extremely well.
For me, logistics is the big thing. It's going to be very careful and extremely slow. We're going to take every precaution and do several tests before the lift is actually made.
To prepare for the move, workers removed the porches, braced the chimneys and windows, and repointed loose brickwork with new mortar. The exterior glass of the tower was taped, and the precious lens inside was carefully braced and wrapped.
We've also insulated both the interior and exterior of the glass. What this will do is two things. First of all, cut down on any vibration that might occur, and it will also keep, if any of the prisms would happen to fall out, it will be caught in the insulation.
When the movers uncovered the foundation, they revealed a mystery and an unexpected challenge. The original lighthouse plans from 1873 showed a foundation of sturdy granite blocks, yet for some unknown reason, the tower had actually been built upon a pile of loose rubble.
The tower inside had to be all dug out by hand. When the boulders were uncovered and we realized what we had, the solution had to be arrived at to stabilize those boulders. So International Chimney brought in a unit to power wash the boulders and the rocks in place. And then we applied a gunite, which you see on the exterior of the rock now.
Once the lighthouse was secured, the movers drilled holes through which to insert a woven basket of steel beams and carefully created a hairline cut to separate the building from its foundation.
This machine is what we call a wire saw, or a diamond wire saw. They start the machine up and the wheel starts rotating and gets this wire running at approximately 60 miles an hour or so, and it just slices right through the granite.
The beads are run on aircraft cable, and it has a rubber topping between the beads. The diamonds are impregnated into the bead itself.
A total of 13 steel beams, each a foot thick, were inserted into the building. Dozens of smaller beams were also inserted to hold the foundation in place. Underneath those beams, 4 90-foot I-beams provided the main support for the lighthouse. 38 hydraulic jacks were placed under these beams to lift the building into the air.
The total building will be supported as if it were on one plate. At that point, the jacks will be actuated and the building will be broken loose.
What we have here is a manifold, and these lines at this stage come from our unified pumping system outside the building. So they feed to each section of each main beam, which we have 4 main beams or 4 lines of jacks throughout the building hooked to a unified machine. What the unified machine means that if one corner is 10 tons lighter than the other corner, it will pick up the same amount, the same distance, no matter what the load. In other words, we have 50 ton and 90 ton. It will pick both at the same speed, same height at the same time.
Slowly and gently, the lighthouse was lifted from its foundation and supported underneath with wooden cribbing. Rollers were then placed under the lighthouse so that the structure could be rolled on beams to safety.
This will go right under the jack. As you can see, it's made of hardened steel rollers, chain rollers, and pressure will be applied on top of the roller, and the roller will set on a beam with a hardened plate. And then after we've raised 10 or 12 inches, the roller's in place, the beam's in place, we'll apply pressure, and then we'll set jacks at the end of the building, and we'll gently push the building at a snail's pace, and then recycle the jack and push another 4 feet.
Pete Friesen's plan was to move the lighthouse in a zigzag pattern using a 3-point loading system.
The 3-point loading system, if you can imagine a tricycle. 3 points on the ground, you can go over rough ground and so forth, It just gives with the ground. We chose the zigzag pattern for the simple reason that it's a natural way to move. If we went on the diagonal, we would have had corners that had very little load. We'd have had the center which had very much load. And because we were trying to create no damage to the building, we chose the zigzag method. Now we're moving 131 feet to the north, we're moving 135 feet to the east, and then we're moving another approximately 100 feet to the north.
In August of 1993, islanders and officials gathered with mixed anticipation and apprehension as witnesses to the impossible.
I wish this building could speak. I'm told by those who have already seen her move this distance that a sort of sighing sound is emanated by the mechanism involved in the moving, and it's nice to think that perhaps the building is sighing with relief after all these years of being pulled back from the edge.
Jack number 9. Jack 9. 2 back jacks in the middle. The second one's in. That's going to be the last one, guys.
We hung a pendulum so that we could monitor to see if it swung off it. If any, it never moved even a 32nd of an inch. We're moving at a rate of 1 foot a minute, which is ahead of schedule.
The original concept was we'd be probably getting 30, 40 feet a day. Yesterday, with the move going as smooth as it is, we covered 87 feet between approximately 9 a.m. and 1:30 yesterday afternoon.
When I first was handed the project, it was another project. But as I get into the project, I'm starting to grow very attached to the structure. It's unique. It's a beacon for a lot of different people. People have said they're really going to be excited and really gratified when it lights up again and they can see it through their bedroom window at night.
Within 3 weeks, the Southeast Light completed its journey and arrived safely at its new foundation.
As a young person, it was out with the old, in with the new. We don't save anything, but as I have matured through the years, I've really come to appreciate the old. And this lighthouse, I call her an old lady, has really grown on me as I have worked on it.
Another year would pass before the islanders would see their lighthouse relit. The building needed to be secured on its new foundation and some repairs made. It was also determined that the current lens, which rotated on an open bed of mercury, posed a potential hazard and could not be relit. Instead, the Coast Guard located another Fresnel lens, identical to the one originally placed in the tower in 1873.
I believe this is 10 feet high, 6 feet in diameter. And when the Navy brought it over, they insured it for $3.5 million.
They brought it across by boat. It was transported up by van and lifted in a cargo net on a hoist and highline. And it came actually through the window vault system in pieces. Once here, it was assembled onto the platform.
On August 27, 1994, the Block Islanders, young and old, came together to see the Southeast Light burn brightly once again.
It's a big deal. Anytime you move a structure such as this, weighing more than 2,000 tons, that's a big deal.
Well, this certainly brings us full circle to where we were when I first saw this lighthouse as a working light with a beautiful flashing green light. The last 4 years have been sad for us seeing the light out, but we knew it was a necessary step to move the building. And now I'm just really gratified that it's not only that we have it lit again, but also that we have it lit with a lens just like the original lens. So we have another phase cut out for us, but it'll be very reassuring to do that with the light overhead on again as it really is meant to be.
I feel very privileged to be able to stand here today and to have been able to take my little cousin up here last week and say, this is what your great-great-great-grandfather helped do. And it's, I hope this can be an inspiration not just for Block Island, but for groups everywhere who look at things and see what is seemingly impossible. And that it can be done.
As we look back, as we look upon this treasured historic Block Island Southeast Lighthouse in the times to come, may we see in it an everlasting reminder of your presence in our lives and in the heritage represented here.
The journey of the Southeast Light is also the journey of the Block Island people. It is a journey back in time, through the island's history and the islanders' memories. And it is a journey forward to the time when their children will tell their own children the story of how these determined islanders saved their lighthouse from the sea.
The constant is everywhere that you live with the land. It's the seasons. And the summer comes back, the grass gets green, the flowers come back, and the beach comes back. The lighthouse is going to come back too.
It's all as it should be. It will be natural again.